Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I posted the link on the recording and in the let me actually just do that again. Yeah, so for those who are watching online and in the on the recording that I upload also, I'll put the link below. So we are on Perek Zion, the seventh Perek of Nechemia. And by way of background, I actually printed the end of Nechemia 6 and also actually Nechemia 1 for reasons that will become clear later. But if you remember the end of Perek Vov, or actually I printed on the first page, the first pasuk of Perek Vov and the last few pasuk of Perek Vov. Basically, in chapter 6, which we learnt last week, Nechemia said the walls are finished, the gates aren't yet up, the gates are there, but the doors in the gateways aren't yet there. The enemies of the Jewish people see a vulnerability, and we learned the whole conspiracy and the whole plot led by Sanballat and Tobiah and so on. And the plots were foiled. Nechemia, triumphs. And Pasuk 15, the wall was finished on the 25th day of Elul. And then 16, 17, 18, 19 says that Tobiah is still lurking around trying to build relationships with the nobles of Yehuda, with Chorei Yehuda, the nobles of Yehuda, and he's sending them messages. So he's still lurking somewhere in the background. So things aren't easy. We now turn to page two. We'll go back to page one a little bit later, but we turn to page two, and now chapter seven starts. Now, I only printed part of chapter seven. Chapter seven is a very lengthy chapter, 72 psukim, and basically it's split into a number of parts. The beginning of the chapter, which we'll go through, Nechemia speaks about various management and structural roles he makes in the leadership of the city, which we'll have a look at. And then he says we have a problem. The city is sparsely populated. We have to do something about it. And he says, I went to the archives and I found the Sefer Yuchsin. I found the genealogy text that dates back way back then when the colony was first established in Ezra Chapter 2, and we'll revisit this. And then you basically have 60 plus psukim that list all those who came back to Bovel originally, came back to Eretz Yisrael from Bovel originally with Zerubbabel back in the first return to the exile. And then the concluding pasuk of this chapter, pasuk 72, says, I succeeded in making all my appointments, and the management of the city is now secure. So we're going to focus really on two things in today's share. The first is the first part of the Perek, which really only lasts 5 pasukim, and then the last pasuk of the chapter describe Nechemiah's management role. He's establishing the hierarchy of those who are going to run Yerushalayim and the rest of Yehuda that is settled. And then we have a great chunk of 60 plus psukim, which is basically a family tree. And I didn't print the whole family tree. I cut out psukim. I just highlighted those that I wanted to draw attention to. And then we'll go back and conclude the story. So to summarize where we're up to, Nechemia has succeeded in building the walls. He succeeded in putting up the gates, despite Sanballat and Tobiah's opposition. And Sanballat and Tobiah are no longer a physical threat, overtly, but they are still still lurking around, stirring up trouble. And Nechemia now sets his mind to creating a sort of enduring model for the running of the city. So let's have a look what he says. By he, and it was, when the wall was built, and I set up the doors. Now, what did I do next? I appointed the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites, the Leviim. So it's interesting. The first thing he does after the city is safely established is to set up the running of the Beis HaMikdash, the smooth running of the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore I appoint the functionaries for the Beis HaMikdash. For those who have joined online, I just posted the link again that you can click on and see the handout. Now, why is that the first thing he does? Because that's what's important. That's what he needs to do. He wants the Beis HaMikdash to be running. That's central to his vision of building the city. Now, what is the role of the Levium? So it's interesting. Normally speaking, and we'll see this later in the genealogy, the Levium are split into two groups. The Shoyarim, who man the gates from the word sha'ar, and the Meshorim who do the singing, the shirah. So basically, the Kohanim offer the korbanos. The Leviim are split into two groups: those that sing whilst the Kohanim are doing the korbanos, shirah, and those that run the Beis Hamikdash, who are the Meshorim, the gatekeepers. If we look in Pasuk Aleph, it doesn't quite sound like that. And it says that he appointed the Shoyarim, the Meshoyarim, that's the two categories you have, and the Leviim. So it's not quite clear how to translate this pasuk, because there is no and the Leviim. The Leviim are the ones that are split into these two groups. So this is a little unclear to know how to translate it. What it seems to be is that in addition to the regular role of Meshorim and Meshorim, he also thinks that there need to be Leviim who are in charge of the security of the Beis Hamikdash or the like. This is what the Malbim suggests. Until now, everyone's been building the city, and now we have to make sure that everything is run in a safe manner. If we look all the way at the end of chapter 11 that I've printed on page 4 in the handout, he does indeed speak about appointing the Nevi'im, and there he does seem to suggest that besides the singers, there's also another role. He says, Obekid Halavim, B'Yerushalayim, Uzi, Ben Boni, Ben Chashavia, Ben Matanu, Ben Micha, Ben Asaf, Meshorim, Negem Lechz Elokim. So he does say that there's Levim who are appointed in a role of sort of overseeing and managing the estate. So basically, it's a little unclear what's going on over here, but it seems that besides the two traditional classic roles of the Leviim of administrating the korbanos and running the Beis Hamikdash on a Kedusha level for the Kohanim, the Meshorim, and the Meshorim who are the singers, it seems he makes an additional job for the Leviim, somehow perhaps overseeing the treasury of the Beis Hamikdash or the security of the Beis Hamikdash, etc. So that's this pasuk over here. I've mentioned that the different versions say different explanations. The Matsuda says they're in charge of the treasury, the storehouse. The Malbim seems to say security, but this is what is going on in this pasuk. Basically, Nechemia is turning his mind to the administration of the city. It's well known that it's not enough just to be a military official. He's seen of enemies, but now you have to start running things. And we've seen Nechemia is a brilliant person. He's immensely talented administrator and leader who keeps on blending and weaving Hashem into all his policies, and that we're going to see the same pattern in this chapter. Pasuk base, Va'atzave es Chanani ochi. I appointed my brother Chanani, ve'es Chananya sahabira, and Chanani the governor of the capital of the castle, al Yerushalayim, ki hu keish emes. He was an honest man, v'yori es Elokim me'rabim, and feared God above many. Very difficult pasuk to translate. So let's first of all talk about these two characters. So who is this Chanani who suddenly appears on the scene? Well, the answer is he doesn't suddenly appear on the scene, except we don't remember him, and that's why I printed at the top of page 1 a reminder of chapter 1. What set Nechemia on his journey to leave the luxury of the capital of the Persian Empire, where he's a senior court official with access to the king, and go to this colony and slum it there and take leadership? The answer is have a look at page 1, chapter 1. It came to pass, says he, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, I was in Shushan Habira, and Vayover Chanani echad me'achai, Chanani, one of my brethren or brothers, came, Hu v'anoshim Yehuda, and I asked them what's going on, and they told me everything is terrible there, there's great affliction, the wall of Yerushalayim is broken down, the gates are burnt with fire. So this is now the continuation, this is the circle being closed. So the whole of Nechemia's journey was meeting Chanani, who presumably, it doesn't mean he's his brother, it means one of his brethren. And Chanani told him everything is a disaster in the Jewish colony. Nechemia goes and he succeeded in doing that which Chanani told him about. He's built the walls, he saved the great affliction, he has built the gates even, and now he turns to Chanani and he says, it's time for you to run the city. Nechemia is being a good manager. He can't run everything himself, so he appoints people underneath him. That is Chanani. There's a second person, Hanania, who we don't know much about. Hanania is the Tsar Habira, the officer of the Bira. It sounds like this is referring to Shushan Habira that we also met in Pasuk 1, in which case there are two officials being appointed, and Hanani, we don't need to be explained why he's a suitable leader. He's the one that triggered Nechemia's whole journey, but Hanania has to have a number of leadership qualities. He is Ish Emes, he has to be a truthful, honest person, and he has to be a Yoreh Elokim, a God-fearing person. No surprises there. Now, there is an interesting turn of phrase in describing Hananiah's Yiras Shamayim. It says, "V'yoreh es Elokim me rabim." He fears God more than rabim. A little unusual turn of phrase. So, how do we translate this phrase, Yoreh Elokim me rabim? So Rashi says the translation of Mirabim means from many days. He's a long-term Yoreh Elokim. He's not a Johnny come lately. He's not a Baal Teshuvah, or perhaps more pertinently, he's not a pseudo Baal Teshuvah. Don't forget that there are people who are perhaps somewhat disloyal to Nechemia. They're not so convinced about the project. There's people who are allying themselves with Tovia. He has to make sure that he's a reliable person. So he takes someone who is a long-term Yoreh Elokim and therefore has a good track record. A second translation of this is that it means he is more God-fearing than other people, which is interesting turn of phrase. He's more God-fearing than other people. The Malbim says an interesting translation. The Malbim translates it as Yoreh Elokim Rabim. He is more afraid of God than the masses, than the multitudes. Interesting translation. Yoreh Elokim Me Rabim means he's more afraid of Hashem than the Rabim, than the masses. In other words, what Nechemia is saying is, I need a strong leader who's capable of standing up to public pressure. And he's Yoreh Elokim, he's more God-fearing than he will give in to the peer pressure of the Rabbim. Why is loyalty so important? Because, as the Malbim explains, you need someone who will be a leader, and there is still quite a lot of controversy around. Let's think what Nechemia has had to handle so far. He had to conscript them to build the wall. He had to force them to give up their debts. He had to force them to release their servants to the building. And he had to distance them from Tovia, who's still mixing with the elite. And later we'll see there's even marriage links with them. So he needs someone who knows how to be tough and isn't going to be a people pleaser, but will stand up to the people and make sure that things are administrated properly. Okay, what is the job now? What needs to be done? So we turn back to page 2, Nechemia Chapter 7, Pasuk Gimel. And I said to them, so these are his instructions. So he's appointed deputies, Hanani and Hananiah, and he says to them, what are the rules? Lo yifsachu shari Yerushalayim at chom hashamesh. The gates of the city shouldn't be opened till the sun is hot. The ad heim omdim yogifa delosis. And while they stand guard, let them shut the doors. The echozu and bar them. The Hamid Mishmorus Yoshvi Yishleim Ishbim Mishmorov Ish Neged Beso, and appoint the inhabitants of Yishleim on watch duty, everyone parallel to their house. So we need to unpick this pasuk because there's quite a lot going on in this pasuk. The first thing he says to them is only open the gates at when the sun is hot. What does that mean? Only open the gates when the sun is hot? Why is he saying that?
No, till it's hot.
He says don't open the gates till it's hot. That means only open the gates when it's hot. Why only open the gates when it's hot? In the daytime, but it's not sunrise. It's interesting. We always think of city gates as opening at sunrise. It seems to be saying open when I don't know exactly when the sun is hot, but open when the sun is sort of high in the heavens. I don't know. I mean, I assume because of security. I don't know any other explanation. But open when at the sort of the busy time of day. The next thing he says is, don't let the watch go till the gates are closed. So even though the gates are open, there still needs to be security guards at the gate. I guess doesn't sound too unfamiliar nowadays. Have the gates locked at night, and when the gates are unlocked, you need CSD, you need security standing at the gates. In addition, we need a rota of inhabitants, each person parallel to his house. We saw Nechemia use this scheme before when it came to building the city walls. Also, he allocated stretches of the wall to each group of people, and more or less he tried to allocate the stretch of the wall near to where they lived. We discussed that either because it's convenient, that where supplies are, it's near to the house, or people feel a loyalty to do a good job. If you know you're building a wall where your house is, you won't take shortcuts. So this is what Nechemia did. By the way, the fact that the city gates have to close is a sign of weakness, right? So this isn't there's some beautiful psukim in Yeshaya that describe the Messianic age when it says that at that point, your gates will be able to be open all day and night and you won't have to close them. This isn't that. We're not in a sign of safety. and therefore this is necessary. Posuk Daled. Now we get to deeper problems. V'ha'ira chavas yodayim. The city is large, ugadola, and is wide and it's large. V'ha'om ma'at b'soicha. V'ein botim b'nuyim. The people inside it are small and the houses are not built. So Nechemia identifies a strategic weakness that the population of Yerushalayim isn't large enough. Why do you need a large population? So that it can be defended properly, so that the economy can flourish, whatever the cheshbon is. Why do people not want to live in the city? What's the reason why they don't want to live in the city? So we'll see this a little bit later, what challenges Nechemia is facing. But it's possible that the Pasuk is telling us the reason for the problem. It could be that when he says ve'eina batim b'nuyim, he's saying there's not enough houses have been built. Is it cause or effect? Is it the population is small, therefore there aren't many houses built, or the population is small because there's not enough houses built? So it could be the explanation is very simple. There's not enough housing that's built. It could be its security. That would explain the sequence of psukim. People feel vulnerable. Even though the walls have been built and the city gates are now closed, nonetheless, you need guards and so on. They feel they're still vulnerable to attack. It could be a basic thing of economics. How do cities survive? Cities can't sustain themselves. It's farmers in the countryside that produce sustainability. The city has to be fed, and they're worried about being cut off or laid siege or not being able to feed themselves. People just don't like living in Yerushalayim. People don't like the city life. There is a posuk later that I printed on page 4, in which we go back to this issue of low population density in Yerushalayim, and posuk base in chapter 11. So this is the end of page 4. Says, "Vayevarchu the people blessed l'chol hanoshim hamisnadvim l'shevet b'Yerushalayim." All the people that were generous to agree to live in Yerushalayim. In other words, it was seen as somewhat of a sacrifice to live in Yerushalayim. So clearly it's not a great life in Yerushalayim, having to live behind walls. There's an amazing Gemara in Kesuvos that I printed in the box underneath. Rabbi Zobin, minayin sheyeshivas krachim kosher. From where do we know it's difficult to live in walled cities? So it cites our pasuk, the people blessed all those who agree to live in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara in Kesuvos is commenting on this, and it's picking up that people don't like living in cities. The Mefarshim there on the Gemara give different explanations. You don't have fresh air. It's an expensive life. People feel packed in. They don't like squashing. Whatever it is. At least in the time, people didn't like living in cities, and therefore Yerushalayim's population is scarce, and Nechemia is worried about it. Now, how is Nechemia going to deal with this problem? Very interesting. Pasuk 5. He comes up with a plan. Vayitzein Elokai el libi. Hashem put into my heart a plan. Again, this is classic Nechemia, where everything is ascribed to Hashem. So he's going to think of a strategic plan. I gathered together the nobles, the rulers, and the people. Lihisyaches, to establish their genealogy. The Emtza Sefer Hayachas Ha'olim Bereshona. And I found the book of Yichsin, of genealogy, from the first wave of return, the Emtza Kosovo, and I found written in it, 2 dots, colon, and now 60 plus psukim of what he found written in the first genealogy book. So just by way of background to understand this, in Ezra Chapter 2, when the pre-Ezra wave of return came to Eretz Israel, this is still the Cyrus Koresh era. We're now at least 2 kings on from that. We've had Daryovesh, and we've had Achashtra, and so on. We're several, again, the chronology, we're not going to go through it again, but we're a significant piece of time later. But when the first return happened, what we saw in chapter 2 is they did a census of the Yuchsin. And Nechemia says, I came up with a plan to relook at that census and ... I'm going to do something with it. And really then the chapter just relists the whole census again. And we're going to have to understand lots of things about that. But before we do that, What is Ezra's plan of creating a census? Sorry, Nechemiah's plan. Nechemia says, Hashem put in my head an idea, and I realized we need to re-look at the genealogy of the people, and I managed to find in the archives the old genealogical record. What's the purpose of doing a genealogical record? Why would Nechemia wish to do this?
Worried about the lack of people.
He's worried about lack of people, and therefore doing a census doesn't make more people.
He's trying to find out coming
Right, wonderful. Okay.
in contact.
And contact them. Absolutely. Okay. So there are three explanations as to why he's doing the census. Explanation one is for the same reason that governments always do census. If you want to plan an economy and allocate resources, and you want to build houses and roads, and you want to ensure that there's fair conscription and taxing, which is what he's going to do, then you need to know who your population is. Explanation number two is it's specifically for security purposes. And we're going to look at that in a minute. And explanation number three is it's spiritual. He wants to know who the yichus of people is to establish that re-establish the colony in a sort of genealogical line. Have a look again back at page 4, because this is going to be all the way to chapter 11 till we're going to see Nechemia springing into action. Well, let's look at chapter 9 first of all. I'm sorry. In chapter 9, Nechemia does a spiritual revolution. Look in chapter 9, Pasuk 1 and 2, it's printed in the middle of page 4. In the 24th day of the month, children of Israel were assembled with fasting, sackcloth, and earth upon them, etc. And the seed of Israel separated themselves from all foreigners and stood and confessed their sin and iniquities of their fathers. Okay, so Nechemia mounts a project of clearing up the descendants of intermarried Jews and separating the Jews back to a Jewish population. And this could be one reason why he's doing the census, because he wants to make sure that there's a proper Jewish yichus. Or, chapter 11, another goal. Vayeshvu shlorei ha'om b'Yerushalayim, this is chapter 11, or Shah ha'om, hipiulu gorelos lahavi echad min asara. They cast lots to bring 1 of 10, Lashem mir HaKodesh, 1 out of 10 to dwell in Yerushalayim, the holy city, and 9 parts in other cities. So the Pasuk tells us that once Nechemia established the population of the Jewish people, exactly as Simon suggested, but just not quite as nice as Simon suggested. Simon said it's so that he can reach out to them. That's not what Nechemia did. He conscripts them. So he does a population survey, and then he says, I need 1 in 10 of the population to move to Yerushalayim. We can't establish a renewed settlement unless we have a secure fortress. We need Yerushalayim to be safe. We need it to populate it. If you don't volunteer, Pasuk base, as we saw earlier, says that the people bless those who volunteered. But if we don't have enough volunteers, we're going to conscript. How are we going to conscript? With lottery. 1 out of 10 people we're going to put all the names in the pot, in the hat, and draw out 1 out of 10 names, and they're going to jolly well have to live in Yerushalayim. Very, very interesting. Okay. So to go back to our topic, Nechemia, very interesting. He realizes Yerushalayim is vulnerable. It's too sparsely populated. You or I, if we were the kings or the leaders, would get straight into action. I don't know, we need to recruit people. We need to pay people to come. Nechemia is a strategist. The first thing he does is a census. And the way he does the census is by digging up the archives of the old census last time round. Now, what I would like to do is I'd like to look through this census list briefly and simply remind you of some highlights. And I hope this rings a little bit of a bell, because this is more or less, and we'll come back to the more or less later, a cut and paste from Ezra Chapter 2. So in Ezra Chapter 2, a census was done. And this is basically, this is what Nechemia says. He says, I found the old records. Have a look in Pasuk 5. He says, I found the book of genealogy, and this is what I found written in it. So the rest is a cut and paste. Simply to jog your memory, let's have a quick look at some of the key pasukim. Does someone have a pen here? Sorry. Does anyone have a pen here? Spare pen? So I've just seen a printing mistake that I want to remember to correct. Okay. Pasuk, thank you very much. Pasuk 6. These are the children of the provinces. Each one to his city. So this is the first thing I want to highlight. We discussed when we saw Ezra chapter 2 that it seems people knew where they came from. We think of the gap between the first temple and the second temple as millennia. None of us moving back to Israel. If you move back to Israel and you buy a house in Yerushalayim or Beit Shemesh or Modi'in or Netanya or Ra'anana, you've got no idea if this is your ancestral homeland. When they came back to Eretz Israel, there was only a 70-year gap. They carried traditions of where they had lived previously, like us. Now we're more than 70 years after the Holocaust, but people go back to Poland and they know which shtetl their grandfather came from, or great grandfather came from, or father came from, and each person goes back to their city. And they came back with Zerubbabel and Yeshua. I hope you remember some of those names. And here, just as a sample, Pasuk 36, the children of Yericho, Pasuk 37, the children of Lod. So I just want to use this to remind you about Ezra chapter 2, where we saw these things, that people are coming back knowing where they come from. And Pasuk 44, we're on the bottom page 2, the singers, this is listing the Levium. Pasuk 45, the gatekeepers or the porters, this is the other ones. Pasuk 46 and 47 and 57, the Nesinim and Solomon's servants. Very interesting. The Nesinim we spoke about previously. These were the porters and the wood carriers and wood choppers, I'm sorry, and water carriers who were dated back from the days of Yehoshua ben Nun. These were Canaanites who joined the Jewish people but didn't have a proper conversion and became a sort of a working class type population in the Jewish people. There were families that had traditions that they were from the servants of Shlomo. That's 57. I hope some of this rings a bell ring a bell to anyone. I'm allowed to be optimistic. A vague bell for those who learned this. Then Pasuk 64, again, these are just some highlights. 61, there were those who came back that couldn't tell their father's houses nor their seeds. They didn't know which Shevet they came from, or even if they were Jewish. 64, they sought to register their yichus, but it wasn't found, and therefore they were deemed polluted, and they were cast out from the kahuna, and the like, they weren't able to eat of the kahuna. And then 66, it gives the total number. And then 69 and on lists the donations of various generous people. Some came back and they brought with them gold and other supplies. And these were the generous supplies that people brought back. And that takes us through to the end of the genealogy in Pasuk 71. So we've got 60 plus Pasukim that basically, I hope this all rings a bell, that basically, like we saw in Ezra chapter 2, explains the different sort of communities who came back to Eretz Israel. Now, there are two questions that we need to reflect upon. The first is why reprint the whole list. And the answer to that question is the second question, which is because the lists are not identical. So whilst Nechemia introduces the lists by saying, this is what I found in the archives, the lists are not identical. They are overlapping, there's a lot of similarity, but they are not spot on. There's slightly different numbers of different family groups. There's some family groups that are added in, some family groups taken away, some slight name changes, some population changes, and the like. How are we meant to make sense of this? So there are a number of explanations put forward in the Mefarshim. So again, just to summarize, we've learned basically now, even though you didn't notice it, we whizzed through 60 plus psukim. We saw that Nechemia faced a major mess in how to administrate the city and secure it. His first step is not what we would do, which is spring straight into action, but is to conduct a census. Then he says, I found the old archives, and he lists all the yichus of everyone who came back. He wants to do a census for spiritual reasons, or for economic reasons, for planning reasons, or practical reasons. We'll have to see. And then it lists the genealogy. And though the genealogy claims to be the same as the previous one, it's not spot on, it's not identical. So there's a number of theories put forward. I'm going to go out of order. Normally, we start with Rashi when we explain something. I'm not going to start Rashi. I'm going to start with the Metzudas David, who is quite a late Achron. But he says what's the simplest explanation. And his explanation is that Nechemia is updating the list. There's no point in just finding the archives. What Nechemia is saying is, I found in the archives written as below. In other words, I'm taking the archival records and I'm updating them to the new population numbers over here. I'm finding some of the families have gone down in number. Seems to be having problems here with my internet, unfortunately. Okay, we have to do our best. Some of the families, is anyone able to hear me? Can someone confirm if they're able to hear or not? No.
Yes, but it can be a little bit intermittent.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Okay, dear. Okay, we'll have to do our best. I sincerely apologize. Okay, so Nechemia is quite sure what to do with the internet. Okay, we'll have to try and make it work. So the Metzudas David is arguing that Nechemia is updating the list, and things change. People names alter. People, by the way, in Tanakh often have multiple names. Some people to decline. Some families multiply. Population numbers change. Some families are absorbed into other families. Some people, he says, may have gone back to Bovel and couldn't stick it out. Some new people may have trickled in from Bovel back to Eretz Yisrael. Some people who were minor figures have become senior figures and the like. And basically, there's a very long piece of Metzudas David where he goes through analyzing all the changes and making sense of them. For example, he finds a minor figure who has now been promoted to the head of a group and the like. This is the Metzudas David's theory and explanation. So explanation number one, which I think is the simplest explanation, which is why I'm saying it out of order, is that Nechemiah's list is relisted because it is not identical to the previous list. All he means when he says, I found the old list, is that the old list is what I base myself on, but then of course I edited it in order to update the census. Rashi says something very interesting, and I think, yes, I printed Rashi, and Rashi says something that theologically sounds quite amazing, and we'll have to understand it. So I'd ask everyone to turn to page 4. Rashi deals with the inconsistency, the same issue, and he says, Cheshbonos Shalmala, the list above in chapter 2 of Ezra, isn't identical to this list. The lists aren't parallel exactly. The pasuk doesn't worry too much about the numbers. The overarching theme is the same between all of them, etc. The author of the book relied on the overall numbers. He didn't worry too much about the details. So this is ostensibly a very strange theory. Well, Ezra Nechemia isn't accurate in its listing. And the answer is, I don't think Rashi is saying any major theological point here. I think Rashi is saying a practical point over here. That Nechemia wasn't able to find an exact list. Maybe in the archives were multiple versions, maybe the lists in the archives were somewhat inaccurate, maybe there were mistakes in it, and so on. The point of Nach is that this is a human process. Ezra's predecessor conducted the census. Nechemia is trying to re-establish the numbers, and they don't exactly add up and they don't exactly match. And that's real circumstances. This isn't prophecy. This isn't, Moshe Rabbeinu conducting a census in the Midbar. This is a real human process done by lay leaders. They're great people, Ezra Nechemia, but they're having to do whatever they have to do in order to establish a census. And they're trying to put it together in the best way they can. And therefore, says Rashi, there's inaccuracies, and Nechemia isn't able to deal with it. Or he doesn't care about the inaccuracies. He doesn't need to know exact spot on numbers. He has to get a basic idea of the population in order that he can run affairs appropriately and and professionally. We don't know, and therefore that may also be part of the confusion. The question being asked is, where did you find archives? It doesn't say. He says, I found it. It could be record keeping. Don't forget, they've been through, depending on how you date the numbers, many years, perhaps decades of chaos and military attack and so on, till Nechemia comes and re-establishes the colony on a firm foundation. So they may not have been able to find. The records may have become muddled over the years. There hasn't been a well-kept archival process, and therefore it's all a bit of a mess. So the Metzudas David's explanation is this is an updated census, and that's what Nechemia is doing. Rashi's explanation is it's a messy census. It's not entirely accurate. Maybe it's telling us how the difficulties that Nechemia faces. That he isn't. How can you run a country when you can't even do things? You can't even plan things entirely accurately. It's very interesting that this matches absolutely, practically speaking, exactly what happens when you establish a new country, and we know this in the history of Israel in 48. The first thing they do is, okay, we've won the war of independence, as it were. We've managed to set up security. Now we have to have a security, and we need to set up a government, which Nechemia does. He appoints Hananiah and Hananiah to be his administrators. And then he does a census, which is exactly what Ben-Gurion did in, I think, 51. The states were conducted. I've spoken about it before from Ashir because there's discussions around the halachas of carrying out a census and so on. And something like that is what Nechemia does. The final explanation given, which is very difficult to reconcile with all the details in the Psukim, is that of the Malbim. The Malbim argues that this is a different sort of census being done. The first census, Zerubbabel's census, was a census of the elite who came back from Bovel in general from the first wave of exile to Bovel, and the second census is a census of the masses and the common folk. Basically speaking, if you remember your Nach from the dying days of the first Beis HaMikdash, Nechemia was exiled a decade plus before the destruction of the temple. Etc. We exiled with who were the elite of the people, the nobles. They went to live in the capital city in Bovel and remained an aristocratic elite there in Bovel. And then later, the Hamonim, the masses, were brought back to were exiled to Bovel, and they went to live in the we saw the Malbim's theory already in the beginning of Ezra. He said this theory. They lived to scatter around the outside cities. So Malbim argues, without going into too many details, that this is a different sort of record. The first record was interested in the elite and what happened, and the second record is interested in the masses and how they conduct themselves. Okay, so the Malbim who reads language very subtly weaves this into the Psukim, but I'm not going to go through all the details of language in order to explain this.
Okay, yeah.
We had exactly this record of looking at the archives, which is when the Jewish people appeal to Dayaves to reverse Koresh's decree, and they say, look, your great predecessor Koresh gave us permission to rebuild, and we saw the whole thing about they go and look in the capital city, and perhaps there's number variants of documents. So we see a similar idea there. The different archives could have had slightly different records of the same events. Yeah, that's a good reminder. Okay, so this is his census. What is the purpose of listing all of these people? So it could be that it is it's Nechemiah's necessity. He needs to know the list of the people. It could be it's Hakaras Tov appreciation. We saw this idea already that it's important that people who step forward and volunteer, and particularly the end of the list, they give donations to the Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash. It's important that they should be listed in the in Tanakh so that we know who came back and who donated money. So this is the rest of the chapter, the census, and now we move forward to the final words of the chapter. So I call upon you to turn to page 4, and after the census is finished, we have the list of their donations, and finally, Pasuk 72, Nechemiah's administration model for the new management of the Jewish people succeeds, or is put in place. The people settled in their various cities, and 7th month came, and the children of Israel were in the cities. So chapter 7 ends with relative peace. Nechemia has created a management structure for Yerushalayim, and the land is calm, and people are able to disperse to their farmsteads and to the various villages. And Nechemia is now going to get to work dealing with the census information that he's received in order to establish the settlement. And it will only be chapter 9 or chapter 11 where he uses this data to reestablish the halachic genealogy of the people and to establish this lottery system that he put in place to ensure that there are enough, that the capital city, Yerushalayim, has enough of a population. Okay, so we'll stop here. As promised, I said I would get everyone back in time for the 9 o'clock deadline, which we're facing because of some sort of sports event or other, of which I know nothing. And therefore we'll finish now. And that gives us chapter 7. And Nechemia Chap next week, please God, we'll carry on with chapter 8. I apologize to those who are online. I hope the recording was sort of manageable.
It was